All right, thanks so much, Reed. It's me again. Really excited to moderate this fireside chat. So, it's kind of hard to top the enthusiasm that Jimmy brought to the stage, but I think we can accomplish a lot of things in Washington, too. So we'll talk about things going kind of across the board, NRC, DOE reform, and everything else. So maybe I'll start, Congressman Duncan, with a question to you. Washington hasn't been the easiest environment the past couple of years, but it seems to me, and I think to most people in this industry, that we have an unprecedented support, bipartisan support for nuclear. What is your view of what it has been, and what's your view of the future for that support for nuclear going into the 119th Congress?
Well, first off, let me just say thank you to the Texas Nuclear Alliance for having me here. I'm an honorary Texan, thanks to Governor Abbott. It's probably because I come down and help deal with the pestilent whitetail population in Texas every year. But there's also a connection between my district and the Republic of Texas, and William Barrett Travis was from my district. So I love Texas. It's great being here. When I first came to Congress, when I was running for the Energy Subcommittee chair that I have now, we put together a nuclear blueprint for Congress, really where our priorities needed to be. And that ranged from domestic sourcing of enriched uranium, ending our dependence on Russia, all the way up to advanced fuel reactors and what the nuclear renaissance that we're all experiencing now would look like. And how would we do that through navigating Congress? And my ranking member, gentlelady, Democrat from Colorado, Diana DeGette, she leaned over to me at one of the hearings we had on nuclear, and she said when she first came to Congress, Democrats really didn't like nuclear. But what she is seeing over the last decade or less is really a shift within their Democrat caucus of folks that like or are leaning toward more nuclear, and they're approaching it from a carbon emissions-free scenario and global climate change. But we seized upon that opportunity. And so through my committee, we put a Russian import ban in place that starts in 2027 with some waivers. And then we started looking at what we needed to do to foster the advancement of nuclear in this country, where the impediments were. And we looked directly at the NRC. They should be there to foster the safe use of nuclear, not be an impediment to that. What do we need to do? So we wrote the Atomic Energy Advancement Act. The Senate had a companion version with Shelley Capito, Senator Capito, leading the way there, called the Advance Act. They both passed each chamber. We merged them together, and that was signed into law back this summer by President Biden. So what that does is that gets the NRC back into the 21st century, gets them ready, I think, and Commissioner can speak to this, but it gets them ready for what we're experiencing across the nation, and that is what the future of nuclear looks like. We needed to do that. That was the first step, second step, and now how do we propagate advanced nuclear across the country? The things that Texas is looking at, everything the commissioner showed on the slides a minute ago, really the United States Congress and the nation needs to develop a energy plan heavy on nuclear, and we can model a lot of things after what Texas is doing. So I'm excited about what I see happening in my adopted state, and build now, build here, and let's build it as quickly as possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that point of view. It's great to hear that type of enthusiasm coming from Washington. Jeff, so you are two-time appointee to the NRC by a Republican and by a Democrat. You spend a lot of time on the Hill, and you do that today as part of our practice at Pillsbury. So how do you see it from more of a practitioner standpoint? This bipartisan support that we have for nuclear, how do you see that helping kind of fill the gaps that we still have to advance nuclear in this country?
Well, Elina, thank you very much. It's great to be here. I want to also thank my friend, the Congressman, for his leadership in the Advance Act and in other areas over the year. He has chaired that subcommittee. Also want to shout out my good friend, Jimmy Glotfeldt, for all the work he's accomplished. I would note he put out a challenge for Texas, and that was for Texas to be the biggest in nuclear. And I just want to remind you today, Illinois has 11 gigawatt-sized nuclear power plants. So you got some work to do. That 8 that he talked about, that's a pretty good start. But anyway, I want to reflect on what the Congressman said. The level of bipartisan support for nuclear is really amazing. I first started working in the Senate, cough, cough, 1986, on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and it was a far different time, and it was, I would say at that point, a majority of folks up in Congress were against nuclear power or were highly doubtful of it. So we made tremendous progress, and when I testified in front of your committee, you know, I saw the chemistry between you and your ranking member, and I think your observations are spot on. Now the commission, I think the commission has made some progress. I think they are readying themselves for a wave of new reactors, but I think there is more yet to be done. Congress, through your efforts, did pass the Advance Act. In the context of that act, there was a charge to the agency to put efficiency into its mission statement and really embrace the fact that in the original Atomic Energy Act, the vision was that we wanted these technologies to be deployed for the benefit of the American people. The role of the agency was just to make sure it was safe. And I think the agency sometimes has leaned a little bit too cautiously and has not provided an environment that would enable some of these. And so I think that the direction of Congress in the Advance Act was excellent. I am a little concerned. You know, some of the initial interpretation of that instruction by the NRC Office of General Counsel, I think, has been overly conservative. And so I think Congress, both the House and Senate oversight committees, will need to maintain, you know, a lot of focus on the agency to make sure they get it right, and I think there's more work to be done in that mission statement. There are two other things that are out there I think are worthy of keeping attention to. We can go into a little bit more detail as the panel goes on, but a new framework for advanced reactors under Part 53, I think there's additional work that can be done there. And an important one that a lot of folks don't necessarily appreciate, the agency and the commissioners have before them a new policy to provide a generic environmental impact statement process for advanced reactors. A lot of good progress there, but yet another area I think there needs to be some additional oversight and encouragement for the agency to move a bit further. So to sum it up, I think NRC's made some positive progress. I think there are still some gaps there, and I think areas where their process could be changed in a way that would still allow them to meet their safety mission, but will allow further enablement of the technologies that are represented here today.
Let me just follow up to something that the commissioner said, and the direction at NRC really starts at the chairman. So President-elect Trump has an opportunity to elect, appoint rather, a great chairman at NRC, and I'm advocating for David Wright because I know David's vision at NRC. I know he knows the caveats, he knows where the skeletons are buried, so to speak, and I think it would be great to have him in the leadership role. The second thing is congressional intent. So when we write legislation, I've always been one to, let's be very, very clear in what Congress is trying to do here so that the agencies don't interpret it one way or the other. We've got to be very clear on congressional intent. I think that's one thing that Jeff was speaking at. And then the last thing I'll say is the Advance Act had 387 votes in the United States House of Representatives out of 435. That is a strong vote total in the United States Congress and the House for anything. And for the Advance Act, dealing with nuclear, to get 387 sends the right signal.
Yeah, and just to layer on top of that, the Senate voted 88 to 2. Yeah. You know, Bernie Sanders and Ed Markey being the only two who didn't. So yeah, I completely agree. It is overwhelming support for that legislation.
That's really great to hear. Maybe let's dig in a little bit more into the Advance Act. So you talked about the NRC mission, that's really important, but the Advance Act had lots of different provisions on permitting, on foreign investment. Can you talk a little bit about congressional intent behind those provisions and how you'd like to see those implemented?
Yeah, I think Congress realizes it's going to take a lot in order to kickstart an industry that finally saw the first reactor cranked up in 30 years. And you think about where our nation has gone, we've kind of just ignored nuclear for a little bit, just regulated it, but didn't propagate it, didn't foster the advancement of it. And we ceded that authority or that role to China and Russia. We should never do that. And so we've got to reclaim our rightful place, not only domestically in building nuclear in the United States, but also exporting American technology to help other countries as they want to improve their quality of life and standard of living and provide electricity there. America should do that. That shouldn't be China, and it definitely shouldn't be Russia. A domestic fuel source. standing up an industry where we enrich uranium, whether we reprocess and create HALEU or traditional. So, and how does NRC approach advanced fuels like molten salt reactors? And what is their approach? Because they do not think outside the box. They are very scared to make decisions at government agencies in general, but the NRC, we've got to get them beyond that mindset and sort of have a SpaceX mindset in nuclear, especially at the DOE and the NRC, because it's coming. And if it doesn't happen in the United States, it's going to happen elsewhere because the world is focused on carbon-free baseload generation. And so really the ADVANCE Act was designed to give NRC the right nudge more than anything, to allow some foreign technology to come in. We're all going to benefit globally from the advancement of nuclear power, and that's really the initial intent. And it was the first step. Now I've got to encourage my colleagues to take the next step. I'm retiring after this Congress, but to help my colleagues understand the benefits of nuclear power and point to Texas and what Texas is doing. South Carolina had a nuclear summit. It wasn't half this room. We've got to have more and more happen across the nation and states as they focus on nuclear power generation to meet that baseload. Look, power energy demand in the world is going up. It's not going down. In places like Texas and South Carolina and others, energy demand's increasing. We've got to make sure that baseload generation is there and really look at how that baseload generation is created, whether it's SMRs, microreactors, advanced fuel reactors, traditional light water reactors. Nuclear is the future. And it's time for Congress to embrace that. And the last thing I'll say, and I've texted with appropriator Chuck Fleischman from Texas, is over the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee right now. How about a line item for the Department of Energy for advertising and marketing? Because we really need to reach a younger generation, not only about the safety and security of nuclear power, the carbon-free emissions, but also to educate them about the good-paying jobs that are going to be out there, the different technical and higher education fields that these young folks need to move into so that you guys have the workforce that is educated and available to do it here domestically.
I'm sure the DOE would welcome that light item. But Jeff, your thoughts on the ADVANCE Act?
Let me layer on the ADVANCE Act on a couple of different things. One, we talked a little bit about the mission statement, and that it's a clear message to the NRC that they need to put the notion of enabling technologies in their mission statement, and that's a work in progress. The other one, there was a series of reports and instructions for the agency to align their process so that large reactors where you had a design certification could be permitted within a 24-month period of time. There were provisions that would allow an expedited process or an expectation for an expedited process for brownfield sites. There was an expectation for an expedited process for microreactors. So there were some very specific elements that you all put in there that I think really sends a signal to the agency it's got to do business differently. The other one that you mentioned, Elina, that I think is a really important one, it's one I advocated for 20 years ago when I was a commissioner, and I was very happy you guys changed it. The Atomic Energy Act used to say if you were a foreign corporation, you could not own a majority share of a U.S. nuclear power plant. The ADVANCE Act changed that, and it said if you were a member of OECD or India, you could in fact entirely own a U.S. nuclear power plant, whether that's a current plant or one to be built in the future. And I think that really sort of accomplished two things. One, it was an anachronistic requirement. It still does allow for the agency, the NRC, to make a determination as to whether that ownership is inimical to the interests of the United States. So that protective nature is still there. But that provision was put into place in the 1950s when the U.S. was the only country that operated nuclear facilities. That's obviously not the case today, where there are lots of countries that do that and sell those technologies. The other one is the economic opportunity that it unleashes. That the United States is the best place to do business in the world. And so attracting the financial support of our allies to invest here in nuclear generation facilities and provide us additional assets to get these projects moving is really positive, and that was enabled by what you all accomplished.
I think it's definitely a very important provision, especially because NRC has been a bit aggressive in interpreting that limitation. So now you've got congressional intent to no longer that be true. Congressman, you mentioned advanced reactors a number of times and the importance of deploying those. So several years ago, Congress passed NEMA, the Nuclear Energy Modernization Act, which had this mandate to the NRC to have this technology-inclusive, risk-informed, performance-based framework known as Part 53. There have been some hiccups in the implementation of that. The commission has sent it back to the staff. The staff's now issued a new draft rule. What is your view of how things are going with Part 53? Is congressional intent being met? And if not, what do you think should be done?
Well, I don't know what should be done and can be done. I do know that my colleagues in Congress really support SMRs, microreactors, advanced fuels, whatever works, as long as it's done safely and affordably to provide baseload generation. I can tell you Congress will probably look at it. We're facing a situation where we saw the massive storm here in Texas and the failures of the grid system here. We've seen things that happened with the storm in South Carolina on Christmas Eve within 30 minutes or an hour or so of even massive failures like Texas experienced. But what we keep seeing in Congress, my colleagues, is the need for transmission reform. Well, transmission reform needs to happen. There's different reasons. Some is access to renewable power for people areas of the country that need that. But we're going to need transmission reform for nuclear as we propagate nuclear across the country. Where does that go? Is it site-specific? Is it localized? Or is there an opportunity to sell that power? So these are some areas that Congress has got to deal with. We've been slamming atoms together for 60 years and producing power. It's not, new technology. It's something that's been proven we can do. That's not the problem. It's, what fuel do you use for that? What's the reactor design? And we are going to have a great team at the administration from EPA that has a role in this with Lee Zeldin, who has mentioned energy as part of his mantra or his doctrine. Then with Secretary Wright, Secretary-elect appointed Wright, and then with Secretary Borgum, all working together to see what we can do to meet all of our energy needs. And we're here in an energy state that produces a lot of natural resources, but we're talking about nuclear. That shows the attention that not only Texas, but the nation is giving to nuclear. So how do we go forward? We need to produce domestic resources, deliver, utilize, and export the abundant resources we have here on the fossil fuel side. But at the same time, we have growing demand we've got to meet, and nuclear is going to be a big part of that. And we just need to determine what that looks like, whether that's localized micro-modular reactors or whether we continue down the track of Plant Vogtle, which was a huge success story for the nation after 30 years, and build baseload generation at that scale, which is a tremendous investment. So there's a capital aspect of it. Congress just need to make the right intent to these agencies, DOE, NRC, EPA, of what the nation wants.
Part 53, I've spent hundreds of hours in meetings with the NRC on the development of Part 53. And it as a former commissioner, honestly, it's been disappointing. When Congress gave the instructions to the NRC, it was to be innovative and it was to create an alternative framework for advanced reactor licensing by 2027. And that balance between innovation and need for speed did not result in what was the most innovative kind of product. And I think the agency, because they were so focused on the deadline, they missed the point of what Congress was trying to achieve. The first version that went up to the commission was very specific about changes it wanted to have, and that it expected more out of its staff. The draft, which is currently sitting in front of the commission now, didn't meet that. They in fact ignored some of the instructions of the commissioners to create a framework that really was not so overly reliant on every single reactor design having to have a PRA. The fact of the matter is, all the advanced reactor developers that I talk to are either going to use Part 50 or Part 52, the existing regulatory frameworks. There is no crushing need to meet that deadline. What I'm going to say is somewhat here, the fact is, I think the commissioners ought to just send it back again and tell the staff, you've done a good job, being innovative and thinking big picture about getting microreactors moving. Use that same innovation and thinking to come up with a Part 53 that actually works and then actual advanced reactor developers will actually use, and we are not there yet.
Where does Part 52 stand right now with NRC?
Well, Part 52 was the framework that we established when I was a commissioner, and I will say historically we had to send it back to the staff several times to get it right back in the 2000s. So this is not new, but that we have the original framework, Part 50, two-step license. All of the reactors, with the exception of Vogtle units 3 and 4, were licensed that way, and many of the designs will use that going forward. Part 52 is a two-step license. It uses a design certification and early site permit to try to move those forward. It only requires one hearing process to make it work. There are other designers. I know NuScale has gone through that process that intended to deploy them that way. Future, I think the nuclear companies talked about using a similar process. So both are really good tools, and I think can get us where we need to go. But Part 53 is an unfulfilled promise at this point.
And I think one of the parts of the Advance Act is streamlining the process, public engagement periods, things that slow down the process, really trying to expedite the permitting process, both for licensing and relicensing, needs to be quicker, more efficient, and I think that's part of the Advance Act that I'm proud of too.
No, and that's really important because, Jeff, I think like you said, okay, we're going to use the existing framework for the first-of-a-kind reactors, but the whole idea is that we need a framework that allows us to build 200 gigawatts more, and if we use the same framework, that's just not going to happen in time. So it's really important that congressional intent is heeded there.
And one thing I would want to add to the mix, I don't want to come off as too negative. I actually think the agency has been working hard, and I think there are signs that things can go the right way. I use two very good examples. First one is right here in Texas. The progress that ACU and the Tour have made for the reactor in Abilene has been great. They have a construction license. Go up to Abilene, take a look at that facility. All they need is the fuel, and DOE has got, and Congressman, DOE has really got to move on giving them the fuel they need. That reactor is the first one that can actually get online. And they're going to have that available by 2027. The other one is Kairos. They've got several reactors they want to build, non-power reactors they want to build in Tennessee. That has been a very straightforward process. I think the company has made a lot of comments positively about where the NRC has gone in that. So I don't want to overly put a cloud on the NRC. I just think it can do more.
Well, let's move away from the NRC for a second. Let's talk about some of the other things going on in Washington. So the most frequent question we've been getting since the election is what's going to happen to all of the current incentives that support nuclear that exist under the IRA, the Clean Electricity Production Tax Credit, the Investment Tax Credit, the LPO loans, as well as the ARDP program incentives, which, we're going to need more money for those potentially to build new first-of-a-kind. So, Congressman, what is your view? Well, do you have a crystal ball on what's going to happen in Congress with those incentives?
Yeah, I voted against IRA just for a lot of different reasons, but there are facets of a lot of bills I vote against that are good. And I think there are components within the IRA that should be kept. Tax credits for nuclear is one of them. Because we still have capital markets, we still have a need to raise money and invest in nuclear, and without tax credits, it's very difficult. I believe there's a lot of leftover money that should be shifted away from some of the more renewable resources to baseload generation like nuclear, and that's really up to my colleagues going forward to do. They're going to hope to do reconciliation for a tax policy, and I'm sure President-elect Trump will have some input in what that looks like, but I know my colleagues are working on that, and I'm sure this will be kept. But the resources themselves, and there are impediments at DOE. I was talking with a gentleman last night where the DOE said one thing early on and then pulled the rug out from under him, and this was even when Katie Huff was there. So I think a mindset from the top with Secretary Wright really pushing down to the DOE staff that nuclear is the way to go, looking at states like Texas and figuring out what the DOE needs to do to help propagate this and support, advanced fuel reactors and traditional, so that we can, I use the word a lot, but propagate. That means build out a lot and replicate in this country, because that is the future. if we want to meet baseload generation. South Carolina had VC Sumner, and that was canceled, and we had 2,200 megawatts we were counting on for 60 years. Now we're looking around going, how are we going to meet that growing energy needs? We're not alone in this. So how do we meet the energy needs? And the future is nuclear power.
Yeah, I think I think we're going to be surprised a little bit about how some of this goes. I mean, first off, President Trump has in the past been very supportive of nuclear. If you look at the track record that former Texas Governor Rick Perry had at DOE with his team, a lot of very positive things happened in nuclear. I do think there will be an assessment of some of that legislation that came through during the Biden administration, and maybe there'll be reprogram and reprioritization of some of those funds to things that make important. I would say for this audience, I mean, I think sending a delegation up to meet with President Trump and explain what's going on with nuclear here in Texas, and here in Texas would be a really good thing. In terms of some of the tax incentives, I just want to point out, the president has stated he wants the United States to be energy dominant. Well, how do we jumpstart that? We had a presentation from the CEO of Vistra this morning. The ability to put power up rates on the grid, that's something, we did a lot of that back when I was a commissioner. I think it was something along the lines of 6,000 or 7,000 megawatts of additional power coming out of the existing fleet. The tax incentives that are going to enable Vistra and other companies to consider that are really important. We have the potential as a country to take a safe existing nuclear fleet and conduct power uprates in alignment with life extension that could add thousands of additional clean nuclear megawatts to the grid when you sort of add up all the opportunities out there. So I don't think the administration is going to want to have disincentives for that. I think there'll be a careful weighing of what some of these incentives are and what makes sense going forward.
Yeah, and I'll just add to this is that I've had conversations with President Trump on Air Force One about spent fuel and recycling. And that conversation needs to be furthered with him. He wanted to get the next administration, which he didn't get 4 years ago, but before we got to that conversation. But we have a need for fueling the existing fleet, hopefully with a domestic source of enriched uranium, but we also have a future fleet that you guys are thinking about. And how are we going to fuel that? Where does that supply come from? Does it come from recycling of spent nuclear fuel, which I do not call nuclear waste? I consider it a national asset that can be reprocessed and used. That's a source. But also domestic uranium enrichment facilities like Centrus is doing. And Centrus shouldn't be alone in this process because we're going to have a burgeoning fleet across the country, the existing fleet and new fleet that's going to have to be fueled. We've got to have that domestic. In order to be energy secure and energy independent, that also means a domestic supply chain has to be stood up.
So let's end with one last question about the international market. We talked about the need to build here domestically, and we can't compete internationally, like you said, against China and Russia if we don't have a domestic program. What is the congressional view on the need to be competitive in the international market, and what do you think needs to be done to further support that?
Yeah, so there are countries like Czech Republic and Poland that are looking to the United States to build the reactors for them. And we see China get the foothold into UAE or Africa for nuclear reactors. We should be there. And I think working with both the DOE, Exim Bank, and other ways in order to help foster that within our allies in Eastern Europe, but I don't limit it to just Eastern Europe, I think globally. And it helps lessen the carbon footprint for countries like maybe Vietnam or India or other areas that are using a lot of coal to shift to nuclear. Nuclear is the future. Nuclear is clean and is reliable and it's safe. We've been doing it a long time. And we have to have the right message coming from the administration all the way through all facets of government, working with our allies to really help the industry move that overseas. I can tell you the support from Congress is there. I was in Poland when they signed the Exim paperwork to start their process for traditional light water reactors, but also the thinking of the future of SMRs. Czech Republic the same way. So I want to see more of that around the country, and I can tell you that Congress backs up the administration in those efforts.
Jeff, your perspective?
I think sometimes folks forget. 2/3 of the 440 nuclear power plants around the world were either from U.S. origin or were the derivation of U.S. technologies. Yes, we have significant competitors in Russia. They have done an exceptionally good job of going to countries, frankly, some of which the U.S. technologies didn't want to go to. The Chinese have adopted a variety of Western-style nuclear technologies, and they will be formidable. But at the end of the day, the U.S. remains the most innovative in terms of new nuclear technologies. We've got to put the full weight of this group together with our government and really get them out there. When you go to Africa, when you go to Asia, when you go elsewhere, and you ask them, whose nuclear technology you want to buy, and they say, we want to buy the U.S. technology. We trust it. We know it's going to be well made. We know it's going to be well maintained, and we want to foster those long-term relationships with the U.S. And I think that's clearly the message we need to take to our government.
And just to plug in for the NRC, where the U.S. technology is involved, the NRC is involved. They're helping these countries make sure that they're doing it correctly, and the companies that are building those. And so there is government involvement from our Nuclear Regulatory Commission overseas at these projects. And I think that's important for the safety and secure use of nuclear.
That's great, and you guys provided some support for that in Advance Act as well, to have the NRC have that international reach. So we've got time for one question. If anyone's got any questions they would like to ask, please go ahead in the back.
We got a mic coming your way.
Yeah, some of us are hard of hearing too. So.
Hi, I'm Sean Hagan from Advanced Energy Bridge. So with regard to the NRC, there was a topical report submitted by EPRI in September, I believe, that looked at the separation of facilities, sort of the approach taken by TerraPower, but in a generic sense. To me, that's critical in terms of decoupling the nuclear island and minimizing the nuclear island in terms of the safety-related systems, structures, components from the energy island. So now you can go into either a straight nuclear plant or a coal-to-nuclear plant. Doesn't make any difference, but you're minimizing what has to be safety-related. So you're taking the cost from billions down to millions, and you're taking the schedule from years to months, just because you're reducing the safety system, safety-related requirements, and what goes under NQA1. Any thoughts on that? I mean, and one other aspect on that is that if we don't do that, I'm concerned we're going to lose our focus on a nuclear safety-related culture if we treat things that have nothing to do with nuclear safety-related systems, out in the plant, out in the energy island. The operators are going to know that those systems have nothing to do, and it's going to trivialize the safety-related systems.
Yeah, let me give you two answers to that question. The first one is, to be honest, I haven't reviewed that particular topical report, but I would say as a general matter, I agree with the notion that we ought to be reducing the footprint of what the agency needs to regulate to that which is truly safety significant. And I think there has been some sort of growth in the agency's desire over the decades where that footprint's gotten larger. So I think the direction that it's headed is a good one. The other thing I'd say is the agency has made progress in considering this in a more holistic way. Within the last several years, they made a determination that instead of the routine 10-mile emergency evacuation zone that we had for nuclear power plants, that you could justify reducing that to the fence line, sometimes as little as 1,000 yards from the plant, because there simply wasn't a safety concern. You had a reduced amount of radioactive material, a reduced opportunity for that material to be released from the plant. That willingness to reduce that, which by the way FEMA fought pretty hard against, I think really enables a lot of opportunities. We site nuclear power plants really far away from population centers by considering the risks associated with these new designs as being much different. We can site those a lot closer to urban centers, frankly, to repower some of those coal sites, which were located closer to cities. So I think that, the agency has teed up an opportunity there. I think the advanced reactor community can step into that, and I think it will enable a much more diverse ability to site nuclear power plants around the country.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So with that, I think we'll wrap up our session. I think we've got some great takeaways: continued bipartisan support in Congress, continued incentives, better, more efficient regulation, and more nuclear for all.
More nuclear for all. Thanks so much. God bless.
Thank you all.